Good evening, all. It is my pleasure to introduce Professor Dr. Uma Kalyani, Associate Professor of Geriatric Medicine at the National Center for Aging at Guindy. She completed an MBBS from Tanjore Medical College and Diploma in Diabetology and her MD in Geriatric Medicine from premier institutions in Tamil Nadu. And Dr. Kalyani has held several roles, and she was the Joint Secretary at the national level, Indian Academy of Geriatrics, and Secretary of the Chennai chapter. She has considerably contributed to several academic works, especially textbooks, IAG textbook of geriatric medicine, WHO training modules, and course materials for the IGNU PG diploma course. As an ICOP trainer, she has helped equip primary care doctors with essential geriatric skills, and she has presented widely at both national and local conferences. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Uma Kalyani, an luminary from our own college, for this TMC Medalogs 17th edition. Madam, the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for that kind introduction. At the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Venkatesh for giving me this opportunity and for starting this academic forum and keep it running, because anything can be started, but sustaining it's such a difficult process, because I have experienced that in conducting this meet in IAG Chennai chapter. I'm not able to do it even twice a year. So thanks for the same. And now I'll go to the subject. So 5M in geriatrics. Who proposed this? So what is the reason behind proposing this 5M? This was proposed by Dr. Mary Tinetti. Tinetti is a big name in geriatrics. This was proposed way back in 2017 when others approached and asked, how can we get geriatrics? How can we make others understand geriatrics, other specialties, other doctors, how to make them understand geriatrics? So she, in a simple format, she has to put tell geriatrics to other persons. So she proposed this concept of 5Ms in geriatrics. So what are these 5Ms? So that thing was suspense was broken before in the group itself. So these are the 5Ms: mobility, mind, medications, multi-complexity, and what matters most. Of course, each M is a separate topic in itself, but here today I am going to tell an overview of each topic and how one M impacts the other M. That's what I am going to talk about today. So first, let me tell this case scenario. As and when I talk about each M, I will walk through this case, how to manage this case, incorporating each M. So an 80-year-old man who has type 2 diabetes, systemic hypertension, coronary artery disease, restricted mobility due to bilateral osteoarthritis knee, comes now with a complaint of urinary incontinence for the past 1 week. His medications include hydrochlorothiazide, telmisartan, glimepiride, metformin, aspirin, clopidogrel, atorvastatin, isosorbate dinitrate, carvedilol, and omeprazole, and over-the-counter painkillers on and off. So you as a geriatrician called to manage this patient, how will you proceed? Coming to our first M, mobility. So any one of us who have come into contact with an old person, either in our family or anywhere, we know how precarious their mobility is. A light perturbation and they fall, and even one fall that may turn fatal. So this may turn fatal for the patient, may turn catastrophic even for the caregivers, because you imagine taking care of a bedbound patient. So this figure shows the rate of unintentional fall, death rates. As they age, it increases. So it is only a US data. In our country, it may be even more high, because we have such a disabled, unfriendly environment. It may be even higher in our country. So as long as we walk normally, we have normal balance. We don't even know how much of what all components are involved in maintaining balance and normal walking. So your vision, hearing, proprioception, and the integration centrally, all this should function normally for us to have a normal balance and walking. So when a patient comes to us with the history of fall, what all we assess? So right from the head, sensory impairment like vision impairment, hearing impairment, cognitive impairment, then cardiovascular, any arrhythmia, orthostatic hypotension, hypertension, then bowel and bladder. Even bladder incontinence, bowel incontinence, if they rush to toilet, then they may fall. Then musculoskeletal, sarcopenia, osteoarthritis, and then foot problems. Foot problems, so malalignment of footwear. So everything you have to assess. Does this stop with this? Important is extrinsic factors like poor lighting, loose drugs, slippery floors. So those are also important. If you are going to treat only the intrinsic causes and not the extrinsic causes, still the patient may go and fall. So you have to address both. So what we do in geriatrics, when the patient comes to us, we do a simple bedside fall screening test, like timed up and go test, gait speed, functional range. So like pulse and BP, gait speed is one of the important vital sign that we have to see in geriatrics. Simply make the patient walk and time his gait. Even walking, seeing him walk will give you so much of clues, whether he has osteoarthritis knee, osteoarthritis hip, whether he has Parkinson's, whether he has a balance problem, his stride length, step length, and of course, gait speed. If it is less than 0.8 meter per second, then his gait is severely impaired. It should be more than 1 meter per second. And other tests, if you want to go for, these are all simple bedside tests. If you want to go for a detailed examination, then we can go for a performance-oriented mobility assessment test or a short physical battery performance test like that. And functional assessment is very important in geriatrics because everything boils down only to function. So we pre-morbid functional assessment we have to treat so that they regain their function, not about cure. Geriatrics is not about cure. So these functional assessment, we have many scales like Barthel index, CARTS index, like we have to score that function also. So how this M, mobility, impacts other M? So mentation. If the patient has a restricted mobility, he is highly predisposed to develop delirium. So as I told you before, you have to assess the pre-morbid function. You have to tailor your treatment decision only according to that. And frailty, I'm not going to talk about frailty in this today, but frailty in a frail patient, you don't have to have an aggressive approach. And of course, medications, you have to avoid medication in the patient with restricted mobility, medication which cause orthostatic hypotension, diuresis, etc. And of course, in a restricted mobility patient, what matters most first, it should be talked with the patient. For him, only preserving functional dependence is important. You give drugs that he is not able to tolerate, then you are not serving the purpose. That you have to take into account. Now coming to our case scenario. So, given his restricted mobility, you rethink about prescribing diuretics. So this I told you before. He cannot rush to the toilet if you give him diuretics. So be careful in prescribing vasodilators like isosorbate dinitrate. It may cause orthostatic BP fall and it may increase his fall risk. So if the patient has a functional incontinence due to his knee joint pain, then you have to think about modifying his environment. So he cannot rush to the toilet. You have to do some environment modification like a bedside commode or a raised toilet seat like that. You have to particularly examine his neurological system to see if any other causes contributing to his mobility problems. Either it is peripheral neuropathy due to diabetes, hypertension like that. Now, an important M, medication. So polypharmacy is one unique term we see only in geriatrics. So when you see that hypothetical case scenario itself, that old man, you can see how many drugs he is taking because he cannot help it. He has 5 chronic conditions. For each chronic condition, if we are prescribing 2-3 drugs, then that itself comes to 15 drugs. So polypharmacy is a very, very common problem in geriatrics. It may be appropriate polypharmacy, it may be inappropriate polypharmacy. So much so that ADRs, adverse drug reactions, are very, very common. At any time, 1/3 of ADR occurs only in the aged population. And of this, they say 70% of ADR preventable. So that shows the importance of knowing medication management in elderly. So these are all the problems with polypharmacy. Because of polypharmacy, it predisposes to falls and it causes a slowed gait speed. This predisposes patient delirium, and drug and drug disease interaction more common when you prescribe more drugs. This predisposes patient to disability and to frailty. So deep prescription, this is one concept that is unique again to geriatrics. So other specialties they prescribe, we deep prescribe. So what is deep prescription? It's a planned or supervised process of dose reduction or stopping of medication that may be causing harm or no longer providing benefits. So suppose you see a patient with like our gentleman with 15 drugs. Can you just strike off all the drugs? No, there's a protocol. So this protocol is devised by American Geriatric Society. So what you do, suppose you see the prescription, what you do? First, you have to reconcile. Ask him to bring all the drugs, either it is a prescribed drug or it is a OTC drug or a herbal medication. Ask him to bring all the drugs. Then ascertain for what he is taking each medication. So that medication may be started for a disease control or for a symptom control, or it may be a part of a prescription cascade. Then while doing that, you have to inquire about non-adherence to drug also, because you may want to stop the drug or you may want to alter the drug. So when while asking this, you have to ask about non-adherence to drug also. Then assess the risk and benefit of each drug in that context, at the present context. Why I'm saying this is, suppose aspirin clopidogrel, it might have been started when the patient developed acute coronary syndrome long before. That time it was more beneficial than risky, your aspirin. Now 3 years down the lane, now if the patient comes to you the bleeding or anemia, you see, assess the risk benefit ratio in this at the present context. Then assess the eligibility of each drug in the present context. Now aspirin, is it needed at all? Because after 3 years, it's not intended to be given for a dual antiplatelet, not intended to give for 3 or 4 years. So you have to see the assess eligibility at the present context. Then prioritize which drug to deprescribe now. First, deprescribe the drug which has more risk than benefit. Then deprescribe the drug which causes least withdrawal syndrome. Then finally, deprescribe the drug which the patient himself doesn't want to continue. So one by one, you have to deprescribe and monitor what it causes. Because don't take off 3 or 4 drugs at a shot, because you will not know whether the drug causes benefit or risk. So deprescribe one by one and then monitor and then implement it. So this is how you have to go about deprescribing. So now if you are in doubt which drug to deprescribe, you have so many tools to guide you. We have American Geriatric Society Beers criteria, medication appropriate index, anticholinergic risk scale, stop and start criteria. So of these Beers criteria is the most widely used in research purposes. It groups drug into 5 classes, which should be used with caution, which should not be used in elderly, which should be not be used in certain disease conditions like that. It has grouped the drugs into 5 groups. So this is being periodically updated. So as you know, drugs are being introduced in the market every day. So this is getting periodically updated. And you have a Beers criteria pocket book to guide you also. But the downside of all these medication assessment tools is these are devised for the Western countries. And as of now, we don't have any separate tools to guide us Indian patients. So how this medication, it impacts other end. So medication that with the patient, his mentation is impaired, then you should avoid medication sedative and anticholinergic effect, because it may aggravate his cognitive impairment. And medication causes, as I told you before, medication causing orthostatic hypotension, you have to avoid in patient with mobility impairment. And of course, multi-complexity, you have to look for drug-drug interaction and drug-disease interaction while prescribing any medication. Now, at a glance, when you see this case scenario, you would think this patient needs all these drugs after all, because he has 3 or 4 chronic disease, he cannot help it. Can we deprescribe any medication in this old patient? But this probably he's taking omeprazole because to counteract the gastritis due to aspirin. Then now you have to deprescribe both aspirin and omeprazole. Suppose the patient still has gastritis even after taking out aspirin, then you can go and deprescribe metformin. So this patient has, as I told you before, is a restricted mobility patient. So you have to think about deprescribing diuretics and vasodilators like isosorbate dinitrate. So for knee, on and off, he's getting painkiller over the counter for knee pain. So you have to see whether non-pharmacological measures like external application of painkiller or IFT therapy or any physiotherapy will be helpful for this patient. Now the next M, mind. Is aging synonymous with cognitive impairment? It's not so, because when you see the green line, that is a normal trajectory of cognitive impairment with aging. It's not much of cognitive impairment. But when you see the below line, the blue line, that is the trajectory of dementia. So what we try to do is that to catch hold of the patient at the mild cognitive impairment stage, because that is where you can prevent progression to frank dementia. When the patient has developed frank dementia, nothing works. So we have to catch hold of the patient at that MCI stages. So what is the difference between MCI and dementia? MCI patient will be cognitive impaired, but he can function normally. You will not be able to catch hold of him unless otherwise you screen for him. So what do you do for cognitive impairment? You have to screen, you have to evaluate, and you have to manage. So how will you screen? If the patient comes to you, if you apparently normal patient comes to you in an OP, then you can use tools like mini mental state examination, Montreal cognitive assessment. So depending upon the time available for you, you can do all these screening tests. So this mini mental state examination has a very high cultural and education bias, because in a highly educated patient, even the patient has dementia, it still may be normal. So Montreal cognitive assessment is more sensitive even in illiterate patient. That can be used. Suppose the patient is admitted with the delirium, then what all we can do? We can use these scores. There are any number of delirium rating scales available, but what we commonly use is CAM score in ICU. You have other scoring system like 480 and intensive care delirium screening test. What is important is you to screen the patient for delirium in a ICU setup, because if you don't screen, then it will predispose the patient to increased morbidity, increased length of stay in hospital, all the attendant complications. You have to screen for delirium and manage. So when you see a delirium patient, always remember there are both predisposing factors and precipitating factors. Suppose a gentleman like ours, 80-year-old with so much of polypharmacy and multimorbidity, even a UTI can cause delirium. Suppose he is 60-year-old, 65-year-old with no comorbidity, even a post-operative sepsis will not cause delirium. So this you should remember. An 85-year-old patient coming with a delirium, don't immediately jump into do investigations like CT, MRI. It may be a simple UTI. So you have to remember. So unless otherwise you address both predisposing and precipitating factors, you are not going to manage delirium. Just by giving antibiotics for infection, you are not going to treat this delirium. You have to address the modifiable predisposing factors also, like his sensory impairment, like his vision, hearing. If he already has some assistive device, using some assistive device, then you have to give him that. So both you have to address to treat the delirium. So this is how you manage delirium. Non-pharmacological management of delirium is very important. Don't immediately give haloperidol, quetiapine, drugs like that. First, you have to identify and treat the precipitating factors. If it is a pain or infection or dyslipidemia, first try to treat it and encourage mobility as early and as much as possible. So keeping the patient in bed till he recovers is not the thing in geriatrics. You have to make him sit and walk as soon as possible, unless otherwise it's contraindicated. And we have something called cognitive reorientation. ICU devoid of family members is not a concept in geriatrics. We ask the family members to be with the patient to reorient him cognitively. So that is very important in geriatrics. And of course, you have to give him adequate sleep, because sleep deprivation will also aggravate delirium. So these are all the non-pharmacological measures in delirium. Unless otherwise the patient delirium interferes with the treatment, you shouldn't go for a pharmacological management. So how this M, it impacts other M. So mobility, as I told you before, restricted mobility will predispose to delirium. And if the patient is cognitively impaired in dementia, simplify medications. You cannot give him 15 medications and you ask the patient to follow. There will be no compliance. And if the patient is cognitively impaired, avoid sedatives and anticholinergics. So what matters most, if the patient has a premorbid cognitive impairment, then you should think twice about aggressively treating them, because the outcome will be very poor. This we have to keep it in mind. So now coming to our patient, how this mind impacts his treatment. As I told you before, this incontinence, transient incontinence may be due to delirium. Delirium is one important reason for transient incontinence. So that you have to keep it in mind. For this patient, you have predisposing factors like age, polypharmacy, multimorbidity, and maybe sensory impairment. And precipitating factors may be, again, urinary tract infection, uncontrolled hyperglycemia, pain, over-the-counter drugs. If anything can be a precipitating factor. Now coming to a multi-complexity. So what I mean by multi-complexity, like this patient, multiple chronic diseases. This you won't see in younger patient. You have diabetes, hypertension, you have coronary artery disease. So these kind of people you see only in old age. And we have guidelines only for a single disease. There is no guideline for us to guide us to treat a particular disease in the context of multimorbidity. So that is not there. So we don't have any guidelines. And even if we have that, the representation of older people are very few in all the studies. So that also we are at a disadvantage. And multifactorial nature of geriatric problem. As you see this gentleman, his urinary incontinence may be due to uncontrolled hyperglycemia, maybe due to prostrate, maybe due to diuretics, maybe functional due to his OA&E. So all these factors may contribute to in a minimal way. So that is sort of multi-complexity we see in geriatrics. It's not a straightaway diagnosis. So urinary incontinence in an 80-year-old male, oh, that is BPH. We cannot say that. Everything, all these may be a reason. We have to address everything. And this I'll come later, range of patients' preferences. So how this multi-complexity, it affects other M. So in a multi-complex patient, be aware of a drug-drug and drug-disease interaction, which I told you before. And of course, there are no guidelines to guide us to treat these patients. And when the patient with multi-morbidity, multi-complexity comes to you, you don't try to address all his problem at once, because you will end up complicating the scenario more. So try to address the problem for which the patient has come to you. So I have to tell one example. Sometimes before an old lady, 80-year-old lady with vascular dementia, with a vascular Parkinsonism and old CVA, she has come to our OP. She only came only for a regular drugs. So what our PG did was, this patient had this as attended a complaint of a flexure contracture in her one limb. So he referred the patient to neurology. That neurologist, well, he's a new person in our institution. What he did was to treat that problem. He gave that patient this amitriptyline, clonazepam, and another one drug. So all thing causing sedation. So next day she landed in our ICU with delirium. So that's what happens. So don't try to address all the problems in an elderly. In the what problems important for the what problem the patient has come to you, try to address only that. Don't address everything. You will complicate the scenario. So now this patient, as I told you before, he is a multi-complex, multi-morbidity patient. So be aware of drug-disease interaction. So thiazides and diabetes. Suppose the patient is coming to with hyperglycemia, then try to instead of adding more drugs, try to withdraw thiazide diuretics. And if the patient has uncontrolled hypertension, see whether his over-the-counter painkillers is contributing to hypertension and try to withdraw that rather than adding another hypertensive drug. And drug-drug interaction. This patient is taking 4 or 5 drugs which reduces BP. So if the patient has an orthostatic BP, then you have to try to reduce the thing. The patient complains of giddiness, don't try to add Vertin for this patient. You have to deprescribe some drugs. So in a young patient, in a pediatrics and adult, what is the only outcome? Only cure. At any cost, you will cure the patient. But in geriatric patient, not always cure is important. Patient also doesn't want always cure. They may prefer functional independence. They may prefer only comfort care. At any cost, they want to be cared at home. They don't want to be hospitalized. So you have different outcomes the patient prefers. It's not only cure. So how will you approach a multimorbidity in this context? So this slide may look simple, but to apply it practically, it's very, very difficult. So let me take this hypothetical case scenario, which I told you before. So assume this patient has hyperglycemia now. Now you want to treat this hyperglycemia. Now, already this patient is taking some metformin, glimepiride. Now, you imagine you have only 2 or 3 drugs in your armamentarium now. Insulin, gliptins, or your SGLT2 inhibitors. Now you look at the evidence. When you look at the evidence, keep in mind what outcome. See whether the patient, suppose assume the patient's outcome, what the goal of care of the patient is just functional independence with minimum discomfort. So with this goal of care in mind, you look at the evidence. When you look at the evidence, don't look at the evidence when the drug shows impressive reduction in blood sugar or cardioprotective or renoprotective. This patient doesn't want that. This patient outcome is only functional independence, preserving his functional independence with a minimum amount of discomfort. So now, what trade-off this patient is willing to take for his maintain his functional independence, whether he is able to trade off sugar control. So with the patient is able trading off sugar control, they'll estimate the prognosis with and without ideal control. Now, you see what is feasible, because you may think insulin may be ideal for this sugar control, but it may not be feasible for the patient. He may be living alone. He may not inject himself. He cannot go access some nurse or somebody to give him injections daily. If you give him this SGLT2 inhibitors, he may not be able to maintain perineal hygiene. He may not be able to access fluids adequately. So you have to think what is feasible also. So having all things in mind, you formulate a clinical treatment plan, and then you have to communicate this plan to the patient. This is how you have to approach multimorbidity. So this is very complicated. Here I am talking only about the medical management. But if you introduce a surgery into this, suppose this patient has a BPH, then if you are going to plan for a TURP or introducing some other drug, then it becomes more complicated. You have to involve those specialists also, like your urologist, anesthetist, everybody you have to bring on board and then discuss this management plan. So that becomes even more nuanced. So as for me, after so much of practice in geriatrics, nearly 14 years of in geriatric practice, even now, every single case is complicated like this. Even now in ICU setup, we are not able to make a clear-cut decision. So that's how complicated this is. So this is the prognostic score I want you to look up online. So it's a very good prognostic score. You have prognostic calculator depending upon the setting the patient is, whether he's in hospital, whether he's in a community, whether he's in a nursing home. So this gives a life expectancy for 1 month mortality, 6 months mortality, and 1 year mortality, like that. So with that life expectancy, now you want to introduce some drug, say statin. That itself shows you what's the time to benefit for the statin, whether you can prescribe or not. Suppose his life expectancy is 4 years, but the time to benefit of statin is say 5 or 6 years, then there is no use prescribing that drug. So that it shows that time to benefit also. And for cancer screening also, this website is this tool is very good, because it shows time to benefit for the cancer screening, whether what are the harms with the cancer screening, what are the benefits with the cancer screening, which this will give you a guideline whether to prescribe a drug or not, whether to prescribe a screening method or not. This is a very good online prognostic calculator available. So multi-complexity, this is what I was describing, telling you before. So if the patient's goal of care is functional independence and minimal discomfort, then you have to discuss with the patient what trade-offs is willing to take to achieve his goal of care. And prognosis with and without this ideal control, you have to calculate, and you have to tell him if it is acceptable for him, then you have to discuss and make a treatment plan. So gone are the days when doctors, we take a paternalistic view and say, see, I'm the doctor, I know what is best for you, I'll prescribe this, you take this. Those days are gone. Here, shared decision making, now it is the norm. You have to involve them. After all, it is their body, it is their health you are treating. So they should have equal say in that. So it is no longer patient-centered care. It's a person-centered care. To quote one example, sometimes before we had a lady in our hospital, she came for giddiness. So when we examined her, she had uncontrolled hyperglycemia. So 1 month before, when she had uncontrolled hyperglycemia, she had gone to some other GH. There, the doctor had prescribed insulin for her. But when we asked her, she didn't take insulin. So when we asked her why, she told she's not, because in our government, we give insulin only for type 1 diabetes. We don't give for a type 2 diabetes free of cost. So she was not able to purchase insulin. And she and her husband, they live alone on an old age pension. So getting insulins out of question for her, and injecting, both of them cannot, husband, she is illiterate, she cannot inject herself. Husband has a vision problem, he cannot inject her insulin. So all this problem she had. Then I asked her, why didn't you tell this to that doctor who prescribed you that insulin? You could have told this. Maybe he would have given some other drug. But she told, doctor engla kekave illa. So that is what happens if you don't involve the patient in your decision making process. It's not going to be a success. Ultimately, the patient is going to end up somewhere with some complications. So always involve the patient in your decision making. So this is the patient-centered care, arms of patient-centered care. Mission and values aligned with the patient goals. This is what I was talking about. So care is collaborative, coordinated, and accessible. Physical comfort and emotional well-being are top priorities. Patient and family viewpoints should be respected and valued. Patient and family always included in decision making. Suppose you are giving some insulin, 4th-hourly rapid-acting insulin, then the caregiver may not be able to give the patient. So you involve the caregiver also in decision making. What is feasible for them? That only you can prescribe. So family should be welcome in the care setting, and full transparency and fast delivery of information. Everything, these are all the arms of patient-centered care. So how will you manage a old person? What matters most should be the core. Only centered around this, your other aim should fit in. Your mentation, multi-complexity, medication, mobility, everything should fit into this. What matters most to the patient. Your treatment should align with the patient's goal and values. That is how you should go on treating the old person. So there may be many medicines, there may be many interventions, but ultimately, remember, you are treating a person. So medicines doesn't cure a patient. It's a doctor who sees the patient, who he only cures the patient. So on that note, I conclude my talk. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. It was on time, and the concept is very important and very beautifully illustrated with the case example. Now the floor is open for comments or questions to Professor Kalyani.
Good evening, doctor. This is Dr. Bose.
Sir, good evening, sir. You remember
Nice.
me?
Yeah, sure. Right. Okay. So now it was a very interesting talk because
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
We have been managing geriatric people in our home as well. The only issue here is I wanted this question because it is often that the caregiver's decision or
Yes,
the
sir.
patient's decision, how do you decide? Like, this is a big problem because sometimes what happens, it's not, as you said, that it's a shared decision.
Yes,
And
sir.
in most of the malignancies as well, we don't take the patient's views. Most often it is the caregiver's decision which is being followed. So
Yes,
how do
sir.
you sort it out? This is a problem which we are facing even in cancer caregiving, because when we tell them that this management may not work for this guy, but the patients are very particular that something has to be done, right? So
Yes,
we
sir.
tell them that this is terminal care or palliative care which will be useful for him, but they insist on giving some form of chemotherapy or something like that, because most often in our country, it
Yes, sir.
is the relatives who are very important in caregiving. So, how do you really tackle this problem in the geriatric age group?
It's actually day in and day out we face this problem also. Not only cancer chemotherapy, even for dialysis, we most of the time the patient may not want to undergo painful procedures, but caregivers, they insist. They ask us to go with the dialysis, to go with treatment, which may be futile for the patient. We try explaining them that is futile, that is not in the best interest of the patient. But most of the time it is difficult. We have to go on negotiating this. There's no other go. But sometimes we have to give in to the caregivers thing. There no other go in our setup. And what I see is, if I am working in a resource limited setup, we don't have much time to counsel. We don't have psychologists to counsel and all. We doctors only do all that. Most of the time it's not we are not able to do that. That I accept, that is a problem. And it's, as I told, it's a very nuanced process. We have to keep on discussing with the patient. We have to keep on counseling the patients and not patients, actually caregivers. We do that day in and day out. Sometimes we are successful, sometimes we are not able to do that.
I think it is highly individualized,
Yes.
depending upon the educational status of the patient, how empowered the patient has been pre-morbid, and I don't think we can give a single answer to,
Yeah.
because I face it in my diabetes practice or other endocrine practice in this part of the country, where many elderly, they live alone. They
True.
live in huge palatial houses. They are all well off with 4 servants, 1 driver, 1 cook, but their children are abroad.
Correct.
Suddenly one day one child will land up and then they will dictate some things, but the
True.
parent will say, I don't want, because they are empowered and they have the money also.
One example comes to my mind, sir. My close friend, school friend, her mother, she was living alone with a walker. She was able to maintain all her activities. She was living alone. But when she came from States, that cardiologist, he told she had a pacemaker. This was functioning pacemaker, had another 2 years of life. But that cardiologist told, because since you have come from States, you don't want anything to happen to your mother, I will change to a leadless pacemaker. So she asked me whether to subject her mother is 85 years old. 85 years old. So I told her not to subject her to any sort of intervention because it may tip the balance in the wrong way. But she went and did that operation, thinking that it will improve her mother, and she felt guilty. If she goes back again, then what happens if the mother dies here? The arrhythmia, she'll feel guilty. So went ahead and they did that operation. What happened was, after the operation, she was put on antibiotics. Because of antibiotics, she developed diarrhea. Because of diarrhea, she developed hyponatremia. Because of hyponatremia, she developed delirium. She is now bedbound. She is now in assisted care living. That's what.
No, I think it's a very classical example. We see it very often in malignancy management as well.
Yes,
As you rightly put it, most often the treatment kills the patient. So it is
sir.
treatment-related morbidity that we have more often than the patient-centered morbidity what we face, and
True.
we are not able to govern this as well. Do we have any guidelines or any criteria to assess that how to manage the caregivers? So this is a big problem. So I don't know. Murali also should give some insight to how to manage the caregiver, because, as you rightly said, nowadays even with the networks like Google, your AI and all coming up, people come with all sorts of idiotic informations. So they come and say that this is available. Why don't you try immunotherapy for my mother? And why don't you give this type of therapy? And we tell them, like, you have to be practical as well, but they don't seem to understand. Even very educated people, as Murali put it, very educated, very affluent people, they want some form of therapy to be given.
Yes, sir. True. But we don't have any thing. We have scales for assess caregiver burden, but as such to counsel caregivers, we don't have. To my knowledge, we don't have anything like that.
Okay. And another question is, how do we assess our mild cognitive, disorder?
Impairment.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I think even after 60, we should undergo that, or what is your take on that?
Actually, MCI, we usually do this cognitive impairment screening only. But if the attenders, if they say he's off something, then we go for a detailed screening. But sometimes even mild think the attenders, caregivers who live with the patient, they may pick out. Patient may be normal. He may score normal. But if the attender says he is off, then we go for a detailed thing. Whatever I projected here is only a screening instrument. Then we go for a detailed neuropsychological testings. But for screening, only these what we I projected only we use MMSC, MOCA, only those things we use.
Is it possible for us also to get screened? That's what
Yes,
I
sir.
want to know.
Yes, sir.
Because,
Sure.
I really don't know whether I am cognitive enough, right?
Sir, you are doing major surgeries. How
if you
can you have
aren't, who
cognitive
is?
impairment, sir?
No. I really think sometimes I forget sometimes, So I'm really wondering when we should start it. That's the problem. Or when we should
Actually,
retire.
previously, sir, when I was doing PG, this attention sort of deficit, which we forget, that was classified as benign senescent forgetfulness, and we used to treat reassure the patient, send them away. We don't even give importance for that. But now, again, that has come under subjective cognitive impairment. You have to periodically assess those patients. Say annually, we have to do cognitive screening for those patients. It's no longer coined as benign. Even those things we have to, but most of our forgetfulness, it's due to attention deficit. I think it's not due to cognitive impairment or memory impairment. We don't give attention to things that we consider unimportant to us. So that may be the reason.
Okay.
Mostly.
Thank you very much, doctor. Very
Thank you,
nice
sir.
and illustrative talk. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It means a lot to me that you appreciate me, sir. I'm your
Thank you.
student, you remember, I think.
I know you very well. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Practically, with our relatives, we have seen that most of the time in day-to-day interactions, they are normal. But somehow at night, this sundown phenomenon,
Yes,
it
sir.
happened to my mother-in-law. Now my mother is having it. My father-in-law had it. They have a peculiar, almost unique type of behavior where they start becoming paranoid. They start blaming the caregivers, especially the nurses who have been employed. They start telling that they are stealing things. Somehow this pattern I've been seeing in 3 of my relatives. I've seen all of them following the same pattern. So what is your comment on that? In the daytime, when you assess them by any doctor, they may not find anything abnormal with them. Whether it's a sign of frontotemporal
sundowning is
dementia.
a known concept in dementia and even in chronic delirium, sir. It's a known concept, sundowning. So we have to treat them only with like a dementia patient. I mean, that is my thing. Probably any psychiatrist in the group can tell more about this. But sundowning is a known concept in dementia.
Because at that time they become really distressed, that as though we are not believing them and we are believing more the nurses or the servants.
And one other thing that comes to my mind regarding Dr. Bose's question is decision making. I had this problem with my own mother about this decision making. She is 82 years old. She developed a gangrene toe due to diabetes. So I didn't want to subject her to repeated operations, because when we did angioplasty, all her, left leg, whole lower limb arteries was blocked. So what we suggested surgeon was better go and remove below knee amputation first itself, because if you are going to remove one toe and then going to remove another toe, she is not going to sustain that repeated surgeries. But what surgeon told us, no, that is not the way we do. We will do only one stage by stage. That is not ethical or something like that, they told. So she went for first for one toe operation, then for next toe, then forefoot, then ankle, like that. When went by the time they went, ultimately she went for below knee amputation. So she died 1 month after that below knee amputation with much suffering. Even I couldn't, talk with that surgeon to do it before. Probably, maybe if that surgery was done first, she could have avoided so much of discomfort, so much of physical stress. But it's very difficult to collaborate with our own people. That happens.
That's what you correctly said. Evidence-based medicine cannot apply to geriatrics. Often
yes,
we
sir.
see the cardiologists insist on giving SGLT2 inhibitor, but when I write back and say this patient is repeatedly having UTIs, has BPH, diabetic cystopathy, 500 ml residual urine in bladder, still they insist. So we have to strike a balance, and everybody should talk the same language. There is conflicting information coming from different specialists.
Yes, sir. That's true.
That's where the central role of a family physician and a trusted doctor comes into play, I guess. So, as Professor Murli sir rightly said, in nephrology, the biggest problem is 80-year-old and want to do dialysis becomes an issue, and I'm reluctant to touch them because the quality of life becomes miserable for them, especially in-center hemodialysis. So majority of the time, I kind of counsel them for a conservative management and palliation prior to thing. But as Professor Bose sir said, the pressures which the patient's family bring down is phenomenal. So they kind of emotionally blackmail you into doing what you don't want to do, and that becomes an issue. And to manage this, recently we found a tactic. What we said is with them a trial therapy. We'll give her 1 month and see how it goes. If the suffering is more, then you have to withdraw the treatment. So this kind of kind of approach is one thing that we tend to use. But I would like to, share a clinical vignette. Recently, we had a 101 years old patient. She was quite active. Unfortunately, she slipped, fell, and broke her hip. And she was otherwise well preserved. She had no cardiac issues. She had no comorbidities, except her blood pressure was very high, 180, 100. Now she has survived 180, 100 for such a long period of time. And they wanted to operate her. And we had to kind of bring down the pressure and take her to the theater. And the surgery was done. They were insisting that she needs to be treated. Now, as Professor Murali sir said, there is no evidence beyond a certain point whether these drugs really benefit them. What do you do in the oldest old category? Whether you really, because most of the clinical trials exclude the oldest old and people with low GFRs. So it becomes extremely difficult for us to take an informed decision. And that's where the tools become very valid. And I often struggle with this prognostication tools, calculating life expectancy, because most of them seems to apply for a Western population.
Western population, yeah. Yeah.
Would you share some resources, ma'am, where we can actually look at the tools that are applicable to calculate life expectancy, to calculate prognosis in terms of survival and all that?
Actually, this is the tool we use, sir. If I come across some other tool, I will definitely forward it in the group, sir. Actually, this is the only tool that has only projected this. We don't have any other tools for that, because I think this is quite comprehensive. It calculates life expectancy in different settings also, whether it's community or in a nursing home or in a hospital. So I think it's a very good tool, what I projected.
Yes, ma'am. Please share that in the group as well, ma'am. It will be useful for those who missed the talk.
Sure,
and the other question which I want to ask is about delirium. Okay. Delirium is such a common problem, especially perioperative, post-operative delirium, critical care delirium, and it becomes an issue. And we struggle with kind of managing independently, because the people, they're quite all right. The moment they get admitted, they become delirious. So for whatever reason, they become delirious. Then it becomes, I keep them off medications. I don't start them on medications. I just try to look at the precipitating factors, wait. But time and patience is not with us, especially with the patient's relatives. They don't seem to understand this is part of the natural progress of the illness and all that. So when you call in a psychiatrist or when you call in a neurologist, our colleagues, they immediately medicate them. Medicating senescence has become a very troublesome factor, because we have to deal with the twin problem of renal excretion versus drugs. So this becomes a big problem. So I would like to know your perspective, how you actually go about handling delirium.
Usually we avoid medication, sir, but only when the patient becomes aggressive, that becomes problem even for the caregiver. So they ask, and we usually give them haloperidol. If the patient is aggressive due to dyspnea or hypoxia, due to dyspnea, we give morphine also. Otherwise, usually when we counsel them, they accept. Attenders, they accept. Why they resist us only? It's only because they are not able to take care of the patient. The patient become very aggressive. These people have to wake up and take care of the patient. That becomes very burdensome for the caregiver. Only because of that, they ask us to medicate the patient. Otherwise, when we counsel them, most of them, they accept the thing, and they wait for 1 hour. We will tell them we'll wait for 1 or 2 days, and if still the patient doesn't improve, we will try to make them sleep. If we tell them, counsel them, they accept that. But if the patient is very aggressive, we have no other go. We have to medicate them. We do that. There's no other go.
Ma'am, I want to say a few words. Ma'am, I'm Dr. Sudhakar, Professor, Anesthesiology, IOG, Chennai.
So Dr. Bose knows that you are my husband.
As far as subjecting old people to repeated surgeries, nowadays the advances in anesthesia are so good that there is hardly any physiological disturbance while subjecting the patient to the anesthesia, mainly due to development of regional techniques, number one. Number two, generally the surgeries they do, for example, small toe amputation, some things like that, they are not very physiologically disturbing. There is no large fluid shifts. People, I feel the old people, they develop complications more due to other causes like say sepsis or the intrinsic disease process or like a vascular problem or something. It is, the contribution of anesthesia to morbidity and mortality is generally less, not so. The fears are unfounded, and it depends on the nature of the surgery also. The surgery is not very invasive. I mean, anesthesia is also not invasive. That is my point, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you for the excellent talk.
Thank you.
No, I'm sure anesthesia has really improved. The only thing is, most of the patients, they feel, why do surgery in me? That is the big problem. Psychological acceptance is very difficult in the elderly. So any small surgery, they really feel, they are troubling their children. So they don't want to accept it. That is the big problem with them.
True.
I agree with sir on saying that anesthesia has really improved.
Good evening, madam. This is Thomas Paul, 1983 batch.
Good evening, sir.
My senior mentor is Dr. Muralidharan.
Okay,
He
sir.
knows me. So I listened to your talk. It was very useful for me because most of my studies involved osteoporosis, treating the elderly. Your talk was very useful.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
See, I just wanted to ask two comments from you. One is what we find now. Currently, I'm on leave from CMC Vellore and I'm helping out a secondary care hospital. The proton pump inhibitors, you put it, no? So
Yes, sir.
Murali sir also will agree with me because many patients, for a mild symptom, for the months and months of proton pump inhibitor, pantoprazole or esomeprazole, that is one. And Dr. Venkatesh also comment. Number two, the elderly people, suddenly they land up and we don't know what is the plan, chronic ailment. What is the end of whether to resuscitate or not to resuscitate? You make plans for your people under your care already in Indian context. The people who have a chronic illness, 80 plus, you already would have made a plan whether to resuscitate or not to resuscitate. These two questions.
Okay, sir. Regarding first, that we also see the patient omeprazole we start once they are in long-term treatment, but whether because of that they land up in osteoporosis fracture, because we are not longitudinally following up the patient, that data I don't have. And regarding second question, nowadays what we do is when the patient gets admitted with the cardiac repeatedly for the cardiac failure, for COPD exacerbation, that time we counsel the patient regarding the thing. But when the patient gets acutely admitted for respiratory failure, if the attender they insist, we have to do that, no other go, because as of now we don't have any protocol to do not resuscitate order. Those things are not available for us. We don't have any protocol for that. If they insist, then we do. But when the patient comes to you with the cardiac failure in a previous admission or in this admission before he progresses to cardiogenic shock or respiratory failure, that's a time window we usually counsel them regarding this trajectory. It may get worsened. So in that stage, what you want to do, this intervention will be futile for them. Like that, we will try to counsel them. If they take it, well and good. If they don't take it, then we have to do all those aggressive measures. Then there is no other go. As of now, we don't have any protocol for that.
Thank you, madam.
So one issue with the PPI in the elderly, especially in the elderly for a prolonged duration, I haven't looked at osteoporosis because we don't really look at, doing the DEXA scans in the elderly. It's not very common in my practice. But the problem is we see a lot of hypomagnesemias in the elderly with proton pump inhibitors. And you see that they have some fatigue, unexplained fatigue and slowness, sudden onset or a slowly subacute onset of progressive slowness. You check that magnesium, the magnesium is very low, sometimes as low as 1. And that is one problem that we face. The second is if there is an unexplained deterioration in their pre-existing GFRs, if there is a dip in the GFR over time, certainly withdrawal of these drugs kind of helps recovery. So the problem of chronic interstitial nephritis and acute interstitial nephritis with the pantoprazole and the PPIs is not unfounded. The risk is it's very much present there. It's very much present there, and we have to be very cautious in using this drug, especially for the older population, especially the oldest old. You have people above 75, they are more susceptible to this.
Thank you, Dr. Venkatesh.
Does the Geriatric Society of India have any interaction with the government or the legal system? Because recently we read something about end of life care and withdrawal of life support. So did your association have any inputs in that? In the same way, they can also introduce advanced directives like in the West.
Yes, sir. We are in that process, sir. At an advocacy, we has a body. We are not associated with Geriatric Society of India. Indian Academy of Geriatrics is in that process, because we, as a body, we have to advocate all that. We are in the process, sir.
Dr. Jay Venkatesh, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Ma'am, very wonderful talk, ma'am. I'm an orthopedician. So regarding this senior citizens admitted with hip fractures or spine fractures,
Yes,
are there any nutritional assessment we need to do regularly? Because if they are admitted for 5 days, I feel they're very fragile. One day I give Astamin Fort, other day vitamin injection, sometimes Decadurabolin. Kind of randomly we treat. Not any. Is there any recommendation?
So we have something called comprehensive
D
geriatric assessment, sir. We should do pre-operatively. In that, nutrition assessment is one part. Mini nutritional assessment we have to do. That's a part of a comprehensive geriatric assessment pre-operatively, which we advise.
Okay.
So depending upon that, we have to take adequate measures pre-operatively. If it is an elective operation, then we have to improve nutrition. Then only subject the patient to surgery.
Joint replacement. And
Yeah.
elective surgery.
Yeah.
Okay. And how this calcium supplements and all we give, ma'am? Is there anything like we should give for this amount of time? Sometimes they keep on taking medicines perpetually.
Actually, recommended is 1000 to 1200 milligram per day. If the patient is not getting it adequately, then we have to replace it chronically. Unless otherwise there is some other contraindication, we have to give it daily, chronically.
Okay. Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you. I will look into those nutritional assessment.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I just have one last comment to make. In my 5 years of experience with an old age home where I was managing, about 40 rooms we had, AC rooms, and there I found out that because I used to follow the dream of what is that? For everybody I interact with, I used to ask them, what is the dream? That's the first question I asked them. So what matters most used to be covered in that. But we never knew that it was part of the M, and we never thought of it as MS. So the M's came in later on. So,
Yes, sir.
so I started from there, So that way I could build a good rapport with the patient, with the person, and that probably might have worked in favor. And once we build the rapport, then things go much more better. That's.
We have been doing this all this unconsciously all along, sir. Probably now it is structured in this way. Previously, family doctors, or everybody were doing all this all along. Maybe now it has been structured that we have been doing all this. What matters most, we always ask the patient what is important for them, and then only we will try to treat them aligning with their goals of care. But now, since it is structured like that, we are more conscious of that. Otherwise, we have been doing.
Thank you, ma'am. But I was, whether it was fortunate or my experience was that I spent 17 years in development side, not medicine. 17 years in the development side in the UN. So there we were into this dream and personal this thing, no? So that got into my life. Like anybody I meet, I ask them, what is the dream? First thing. So what matters most for you? So that came in, and that sort of helped me in that getting a rapport. Even with my HIV work, I start with that only. So
that builds a good rapport. And then after that, we are on good terms with the patient. So
Yes, sir.
confidence is built up.
Yes.
Thank you,
True.
ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Very
Thank you,
good.
sir.
I could refresh all my geriatric and gerontology. I went into gerontology, not geriatrics.
Yes,
So
sir.
you're doing it as part of gerontology.
Thank you,
ma'am.
sir. Thank you very much.
Sir, Rafiq sir, may I ask what was the commonest dream or desire or wish these elderly people expressed?
Oh, it differed from person to person. You had to tailor everything to each person. Because one person would be doting his granddaughter. One person would be all about, getting a tree cut down that is opposite his window. So, because he's sure that will fall on him, on his room or something like that. So, each person had a totally different thing, and you had to go by their own. These people have achieved their past dreams. And so one person, for example, was a pilot. Another one was secretary to Indira Gandhi. So each one has totally different, and they had all been VIPs in their prime, but now they're looked on as discards. So all these mental, what you call, breaks are there in their life. So the dreams keep changing, and you have to find out for each one separately. Each one has a totally different dream. But once you know that and you're playing to that dream, no, then they immediately they'll eat from your hands, so to say.
I think a
So they
lot
have
of
regrets, sir.
cultural, socio-economic factors, they are all important. Like in
Pardon?
this part of the country, my patients, a 90-year-old will talk about going for a Europe vacation, then next year going for a holiday to Far East. They are like that. There are many of my patients who are in their 90s who are enjoying life to the hilt. They play golf. There is one group of ladies. My patient is 78-year-old, but every 6 months, her group they go on a vacation. Last time they had gone to Goa, and she proudly showed me pictures from the beach where they were all standing on the beach. So I think maybe another talk you will definitely cover about how their social interactions help, because now loneliness
It's
is considered
it's
to be
very
the
common.
biggest epidemic affecting
Yes.
especially elderly.
Elderly. It's true.
So if there are no further questions or comments, we will close the session for today. And I would once again thank Professor Uma Kalyani Madam for sparing her time and expertise
Thank
for
you,
our
sir.
forum. And kindly keep sharing more clinical vignettes and your comments
Sure.
in the group, Madam. So
Sure,
especially
sir.
case related, because this is something which is very important, and we are struggling with this, and the kind of pain people have, especially at this age group, is phenomenal. And individual physicians can never do this alone. We definitely need social workers. We definitely need physical rehabilitation specialists and a whole lot of other teamwork. But at least by discussing, we can create a lot of awareness amongst
Sure.
our colleagues.
Sure,
So
sir. Sure.
kindly share with that. Thank you all. Thank you for
Thank
attending and making this event much more lively. The discussions were very fruitful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks,
It was
Venkatesh.
wonderful.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.